Infrastructure. We need roads because the main source in that area to get their product out is trucking, obviously. But it's also a main source of how employees get to the fields, get from home and back. And as a gang prosecutor, it was kind of interesting, as I was for about 6 years before I took this job. What you saw, these kids who had these families, they got into the gangs because they were looking for that familial structure that they had growing up, but their parents were too busy, either at work or stuck on the roads in traffic, and weren't at home. And so you saw these kids going into gangs. But also, when it comes to agriculture, a key thing is water, as you understand well. And we get it from above, and we get it from below. It doesn't come in from the Sierras. Basically, either it rains and we keep it in our reservoirs, or we stick a straw in the ground and take it out of the aquifers. Now, the aquifers, which have been pretty strong, actually got us through the last couple droughts that were there in California. But the problem is that we sucked a lot out, and therefore it sucked a lot of seawater in. And a way to combat that is with some recycling plants that we're creating. And basically taking a lot of ag water, a lot of wastewater, filtering it, cleaning it, and then putting it back in the ground as well. Now, also with the reservoirs, what they're trying to do and what they realized based on the Orville Dam and the spillway and the catastrophe that happened up there, they realized they have to replace both spillways as well. So obviously, these types of water projects, as I'll call them, are very important to my area on the Central Coast. And my question to you, Mr. DiLoretto, would be, you know, these types of projects, obviously, like I said, they're important, but how can we move faster on these types of projects with continuing to make them safer as well?
Right. Well, I think we've talked about it a little bit today with respect to how we do permit them, and certainly doing a comprehensive assessment as opposed to individual agency helps do that. And again, I was involved in one where we actually had that opportunity, and it went much faster, while letting everybody have an opportunity to comment on the issues that they're concerned about. Yeah. And so that certainly can slow down. The other thing that we have found on some of these projects, though, that have federal funding is that the funding comes over a period of a number of years. And it doesn't just come at once, and that creates an uncertainty for the agencies that are doing those projects. Are they going to get funding in the next cycle of the budget? Sure. So as you think about this, we're going to fund these as a project, and we're going to build them as a project, and you know they will happen. Yeah, and I guess there's also another project we're working on, speaking of water. It's called the Pajaro River there, and it floods quite often, unfortunately. And we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers, slowly but surely, we're working with them. And we're going to be dealing with the funding process and dealing with the budget cost ratio, the BCR. And unfortunately, they don't take into account the value of the fields that are in the area, as well as the fact that there's a lot of low-income housing in that area. Do you feel that that there's any way to up that BCR in any way for those types of Yeah, Congressman, I'm probably not the best to answer that, but that's certainly something that the conversation you have as an elected official with them is critical to help them see there's bigger picture than just one way to approach it.
Exactly. Thank you. I appreciate that. In projects like this, though, you know, is the appropriations, is there any other federal funding methods, avenues for these types of projects that you can think of?
I think, if I'm correct, and I wasn't here, you've recently passed some projects that are some funding for dam safety, which certainly helps, levees, as well, in my case, drinking water agencies. And those are a piece of the puzzle as a partnership between local, state, and federal government that's important. And we count on the federal government to be a partner with the rest of those. So those are the key ones that we've been working on with your staff members as well.
Great. We'll continue to work on them. Thank you very much. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. With that, let me recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Dr. Westrup, to inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for still being here. I know it's been a long day. You know, Mr. Spear, you were talking about the time spent in traffic, and as a doctor, I got to tell you, it was an interesting statistic that doctors are now spending 55 hours a year just logging in. Not engaged with patient care, just logging in. It's a similar type of frustration, I guess, yeah, we might say. And in one case, we're here to solve something. In another case, we caused it. But that's another story altogether that comes across this committee. Mr. Scribner, you were talking about something that perked my, grabbed my attention when we're all talking about public-private partnerships, what are the possibilities of things that we can do there, and you mentioned something about bonds. Could you go into some detail of that and where it may be taking place and how it's working?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We do have either completed or under development about 10 express lane projects, and I think this is something where you could look at for public-private partnerships to sort of trial these out, and we are seeing this across the country. But if you're looking at converting your existing high-occupancy vehicle lanes into high-occupancy toll lanes, leveraging this private financing is one way to do that, and it's proving successful across the country in small doses so far, but we hope it expands.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm from southern Ohio. We have I-75 going across from Ohio to Kentucky, and so there's a debate that's been going on seemingly my entire adult life about whether, well, can we do it with tolls when people don't want tolls, and you go back and forth. And, you know, as I came to Congress and got to know this area, I say, oh, what's this easy pass lane? Well, if you want to sit in the traffic, you can. And if you don't, you can pay for it. And it seems to me that that might be the answer we need for our bridge. I would think the trucking industry would say, fine, we'll pay for the easy pass, and we're going to go right through. And so those are the types of ideas that I like to hear more about and see and try to share with people because, you know, this seems to me like a good mix. And Mr. DiLoretto, you may want to comment on that as I see you sort of acknowledging these opportunities that exist. I mean, I will tell you, when I was a student in Chicago, going from Cincinnati to Chicago, if I didn't want to pay that at that time $1 for the Skyway, I went around it. But we do have opportunities where we can build things that people are willing to pay for.
Well, just to respond to your comment there, Congressman, I come from a city that is actually looking at the very thing you're talking about, tolling the existing interstate as a way to try to pay for it. And they've raised their gas tax as well. They did both. And then I will also tell you that there's a lot of unpopularity amongst the people that live there regarding that notion. They can get the sense we need to pay for it. They don't get the sense that it's them that maybe perhaps needs to pay for it. So it's going to be one of the demonstration projects. This one in Seattle's looking at one too.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that I see, you know, I have companies like Procter & Gamble and General Electric in my district, and there's a few things they want. They want to stay where they are. They want a thriving community, and certainly good economy helps that, but they also need the infrastructure. And so they're looking at ways to say, how can we engage in some way, because this helps our business. Talk about more efficiency, et cetera, lowering costs. So has there been any opportunities such as that where businesses directly get involved with enhanced infrastructure because it serves their purpose? I mean, I-75, that's from Michigan to Florida. You know, I think it's like 4% of the GDP goes over that bridge every day. Yeah.
Well, I know certainly in the state that I live in, we have a charge called a system development charge that allows you, that you buy into the system that's paid and also for the future. And businesses pay that, and they pay it understanding that we're building highways for them, we're increasing the water line, we're doing the sewer line. So we've had those partnerships, and sometimes they've actually built facilities that we then take so that they can use them. It doesn't happen, you know, a lot and all the time, but there is that recognition.
Thank you. Mr. Spear?
Yeah, I just want to delineate a little bit between new construction and tolling existing roads, because I think that's a really important distinction. Nothing gets our back up in our industry. Trucking really opposes tolling, especially on existing roads that we've already paid for. Building new infrastructure that is tolled, it's tolerable within our industry. It's something that we would work with this committee to understand. Certainly in T&I, we've shared this opinion. What we don't want is being forced, you know, into one or the other. We still need access to the non-tolled roads. And what tolling on existing infrastructure also does, and why a lot of thought needs to be put into this, is that if your business is located at those intersections of that interstate, you toll that, you're going to push a lot of that traffic away. That's going to cost jobs. It's going to put people out of work. And that's real. And you're also putting a lot of 80,000-pound vehicles away from the roads they should be on into two-lane situations where, You know, a lot more passenger vehicles are located, a lot more kids are going to school. You do not want that truck traffic deviating into towns on two-lane highways. So policy matters. And when we're talking about tolling, new infrastructure versus existing, I really think it's important that you make that distinction.
Yeah, and the bridge I'm talking about, they're talking about a new bridge because the other one's fallen down. Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. You know, I'm proud to represent Florida on this committee, but I can tell you if my kids brought home a report card that looked like the one Florida received from the American Society of Civil Engineers, they'd be grounded with no iPad privileges. So, you know, it's really unfortunate that that's the state of transportation and infrastructure in Florida, given the fact that in my Orlando area district, I hear about infrastructure challenges all the time from my constituents. And we all, living in that area, face it firsthand. I can't tell you how many hours people spend stuck on I-4. And in part, we're a victim of our own success. The Orlando area is booming. New residents contribute so much to our economy and our social fabric, but they put additional pressure on our infrastructure systems. And plus, Orlando gets more visitors than any other city in the country, over 70 million visitors a year. Simply put, our infrastructure just hasn't kept pace with our growth. And the same thing is happening in all across the country. And that's why I hope to be part of a bipartisan effort by this committee and other committees to try to pass smart, fiscally responsible bill that is equal to the problem at hand. I think there's a real opportunity to get something meaningful done. Mr. DiLoretto, there was recently a piece in the Orlando Sentinel noting that Central Florida is home to many lower-income workers desperate for public transportation, folks who struggle to afford rent and groceries and monthly car expenses. The article observes, though, that despite this high demand, the use of the region's public bus and rail systems is relatively low because there just simply hasn't been enough investment in these systems to make them practical and a convenient option for many working families. Unlike Mr. Scribner, would you agree that robust federal funding for local public transit should be part of any infrastructure package that Congress crafts?
Well, absolutely. We believe it's part of an overall package. There's a $90 billion transit maintenance backlog. And in certainly all of those communities, that's the way many people get to work. That's in some cases the only way you're going to be able to get to work. So it's part of a multimodal system that gets you to and from your job. And in many cases, we can't build more roads because we're physically limited by the land we have there.
And on another issue, Mr. DiLoretto, I'm concerned about Florida's water-related infrastructure. We have serious challenges protecting water quality from things like harmful algae blooms. It's bad for the environment, for human health, for tourism, for recreational and commercial fishing, and for the broader economy. And quite frankly, it threatens Florida's fundamental way of life. The Corps of Engineers invests considerable resources in projects throughout the state that can reduce some of these algae blooms. But these projects take a long time, and they compete for funding with other national priorities. If Congress were, as a part of a comprehensive infrastructure package, be able to provide additional investments into this, would this improve the Corps of Engineers' ability to execute more quickly on some of these projects? And I think we've heard other colleagues of mine express some frustration with the speed with which the Corps executes on its projects.
Right. Well, clearly, additional investments is one of our first solutions to solving this D+ grade that our nation and report card got. And certainly, if the Corps of Engineers had additional funding, they would be able to attack additional projects that they simply can't get to now. And so they're probably concentrating on existing projects, and they're not able to get to these.
Thank you. And Mr. Spear, as you know, the federal government invests in surface transportation projects through funding in the form of a formula and competitive grants, through financing in the form of loans and loan guarantees, and through favorable tax treatment for things like muni bonds and private activity bonds. You heard me mention my issues traveling on I-4, which is currently being upgraded through a public-private partnership supported by a federal loan program. As Congress looks to improve our highways to promote commerce and improve quality of life, should we prioritize funding, financing, or tax?
I think it's a mix of all three, and I think it really depends on, you know, the project that you're looking at and you know, the location that it's at, whether it's urban versus rural or agrarian versus, you know, sea. So there's a whole host of elements that I think feed into how you want to construct that type of project and how it's paid for. So I think it's a mix. I listened very carefully to Chairman DeFazio and how he looks at, you know, P3s, for instance. It really it's code for tolling in many instances. It's not in the instance that you're talking about at I-4, but in a lot of places that is tolling, and it really requires throughput, and he mentioned that. It's only profitable if you have a high volume of vehicles going through it, and that's actually only profitable on less than 1% of the roads and bridges in the United States. So for roads and bridges, P3s really aren't the best vehicle. It might be for fixed assets like airports and ports. I don't want to dismiss that, but from our perspective, the best way to do it is through a user fee, and then within that user fee to really prioritize. The 17% that I said where the congestion is, you know where your targets are around the country. We know where the top 100 bottlenecks are, one of them being in your state, of course, and you can prioritize that from national priorities and alleviating heavy congestion. That reflects in the prices we pay for projects, but you also can put prioritization in there for local priorities as well.
Great, thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Holding.
Thank you. I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing today, and I look forward to working with my friends across the aisle to ensure we have effective and efficient funding for our nation's infrastructure needs. And one of the major concerns for me is around the solvency and the direction of the Highway Trust Fund. Since fiscal year 2008, revenues flowing into the Highway Trust Fund have been insufficient, and we've had to transfer to address this overspending. Congress had to transfer $73.3 billion over a 7-year period into the fund to cover the shortfall. In 2015, Congress finally passed a long-term reauthorization, and with that, transferred an additional $71 billion into the Highway Trust Fund to cover the expected shortfall through 2020. And while this bill provided stability and investment, it really didn't address the underlying solvency issues of the Highway Trust Fund in perpetuity. So I've been listening to the testimony today, and I'm pleased that there seems to be agreement that we need to do something to address this solvency and that we need to be creative in order to do this. Everything's on the table, so to speak. And while there has been a number of ideas presented to address revenue, including a gas tax, including the VMT, tolls, and user fees, among others, I think it's also important that we have a discussion about spending. Simply addressing revenue needs without looking at the whole picture and ensuring funds are being allocated to appropriate projects that meet the purpose of the Highway Trust Fund would not actually be a creative solution, but rather Congress continuing its own short-sighted tax and spend policies. So, Mr. Scrivener, to you, in your testimony, you expressed the importance of spending smarter and ensuring that allocated funds are actually used for projects of national importance. I really appreciate that part of your testimony. And one area, the Highway Trust Fund, that you single out in particular is the mass transit account, which was not originally part of the fund and was added in the 1980s. Mass transit is currently subsidized by drivers as it receives more than its fair share of the fuel taxes and it pays into the Highway Trust Fund. And further, as you note in your testimony, in total, around 25% of the fuel tax funding is spent on non-highway related projects. So, Mr. Schroeder, could you expand a bit more on the impact of this diversion of funds has on the Highway Trust Fund, and do you feel that this type of spending is an appropriate or efficient use of the fuel tax?
Thank you for that question. So no, I don't think that this is an appropriate use of the fuel tax. The mass transit account, as you said, was created in the 1980s, and this was a way in order to secure votes from representatives of big cities who were more concerned about their ailing mass transit systems back then than expanding the highway system, for instance. So it was a bit of a horse trade there, and that has stuck with us ever since. I don't think we're getting the value out of it. When you see light rail projects going up in the Sun Belt, you have to ask yourself, is this the best use of federal funding? Streetcar projects across the country, technology that is slower than buses and costs several times more than that, that is not a wise use of federal funding. So I do think, this mission creep has gotten really bad in recent years, and the best thing to do would be for Congress to refocus the program on what it was initially intended to do, and that was to support these highway corridors, and I would go even further and say we should be really looking at these high freight corridors to meet that, nationally significant test.
Thank you. I concur in your opinion. Further, in your opinion, are there other areas of highway trust fund spending that we could address in order to rein in perhaps this mission creep and protect the solvency of the fund?
I think there should be some examination of how we could better incentivize, and when I say we, I mean the federal government, better incentivize locals and states who are receiving these capital grants, somehow incentivize them to maintain what they already have. Because if you let your projects decay due to a lack of maintenance, you're not only increasing the costs of eventual reconstruction of those projects and maintenance of them, you're providing an incentive to not repair them at all, because eventually, if things go bad enough, you're going to be seeking reconstruction grants, which then reopen the door for capital funding. So I think we need to address some of these core incentives as well.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Gomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I actually served in the California legislature before coming to Congress, and I was there from 2013 to 2017, July of 2017. I actually was the chair of appropriations and also was the co-chair of the Conference Committee on Infrastructure. So I've already been in this debate once before when it comes to how do we fix our crumbling roads. One of the things that I've realized, it's the same kind of concerns people have. It's the same arguments that they were making at the state level in California. The gas tax hadn't been increased since 1993 in California, same as the federal gas tax. I'm curious about what happened. It's a rhetorical question, but in 1994, that really kind of really put off elected officials from taking responsibility for maintenance of the highways, roads, bridges, infrastructure in general. Something did happen. One of the things we're going to have to do is address everybody's concerns one by one. You know, the states that say, why should I care about transit when I don't have transit? Why should I, care about, waterways if I don't have that many waterways? We have to really kind of address people's concerns. If not, any excuse that people have, they're going to find a reason why not to vote for an infrastructure package. It's a difficult thing to do. I actually voted on it 2 days after my primary to come to Congress on a bill that has everything that you guys are talking about. Increasing the gas tax, a road repair fee, making sure that electric vehicles were paying something as well. So everything you're talking about, we dealt with. The idea that the money at the state level was not being used for roads and infrastructure that it should be. Oftentimes when you look at it, it is in some extent, and I think the American people have a broader sense of roads and infrastructure. They think about it as transportation. Because when you're like taking a bus, oftentimes you walk down the road, you take the bus drops you off somewhere, you might jump on now to an electric bike or a scooter, right, to get to your next destination. It's no longer just I jump in my car, get out of my driveway, stop, drop off the kids at school, and then get to work and back. It's more complicated than that, and that's why I think I want people to focus. In California, we did it. In LA, we also increased revenue. One of the things I want to ask is, should any infrastructure package include credit for localities that have taken steps to support infrastructure locally and incentivize localities and municipalities who have done so? California, we did it already. LA County, we passed Measure M on the same night that Donald Trump took office. What kind of what should be included in the infrastructure package that says, you know what, these people are doing the right thing? We should continue to reward them for that, but also how do you get other states and municipalities to do this same thing? Just open question.
You know, I think you've got to maintain balance between federal, state, and local roles. You certainly want to leverage more local participation, private investment, and I think the federal policy level holds a lot of leverage when you're controlling certain percentages of funding that match. They're certainly incentivized at the local level to do more. They get more at the federal level, so you can have much bigger impact in terms of the type of project that you're trying to fund. So I'm not one to suggest that you want to hand all authority to the state and local level, because you're going to be very dismissive of probably more than half the states in the U.S. that are very reliant on the federal role. So I think you've got to maintain a bit of a balance there. Devolution certainly is not going to be beneficial from an interstate commerce point of view. You're essentially going to limit more than half the state's ability to raise that kind of revenue on their own. Certainly at the local level, that's even a bigger problem. And you're not going to have the connectivity for ag states, for instance, to move their product from central U.S. to West Coast ports. So it's connectivity through balance between federal, state, and local role.
You mentioned incentives, local incentives.
I think you're on to something there, Representative. I think we should be finding ways to reward the states who not only maintain their infrastructure to a state of good repair, but also things like cost efficiency, rewarding these states that are trying and finding solutions, because right now I think we often have the priorities backwards at the federal level.
Well, I'm out of time. I look forward to continuing this conversation. You never answer all the questions in one hearing, but I do appreciate the dialogue. Thank you so much.
Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, and I want to thank especially the witnesses. As noted philosopher Yogi Berra once said, it's deja vu all over again, because such as the experience Mr. Gonzalez had in California, similarly in Pennsylvania, where I was in the state legislature before coming here 5 years ago, we faced a similar situation. Hadn't had a major transportation bill since the early 1990s. Successive governors had tried and failed to get something passed. And then, in the 2013 time period, after a couple decades of not being able to get it done, you had the head of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce and the head of the state AFL-CIO coming in side by side to lobby different members of the legislature, both Democrats and Republicans, to come together, do the right thing, and finally solve this problem. Because while the state of our infrastructure, as the American Council of Engineers has shown quite well, while the state of the national infrastructure is approximately a D+, unfortunately, in my state of Pennsylvania, that is replicated. So much so that when 60 Minutes several years ago did a piece to show the state of America's crumbling infrastructure, the state they came to as Exhibit A was Pennsylvania. And one of the places they visited was a crumbling part of I-95 in what is now in my district in the city of Philadelphia. So I was glad that with the Chamber of Commerce and with labor lobbying side by side, that we were able to bite the bullet, have a bill passed that was meaningful, became Act 89. Yes, it included revenue increases, which were quite controversial. They made many legislators in both parties nervous. Well, lo and behold, the very next election, not one legislator who voted for those revenue increases was defeated. Not one. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, this is what we need to do at the national level. I take an all-of-the-above approach. I am rather agnostic on the different options that we have available on the menu to fund our priorities. And yes, our priorities with respect to roads, bridges, rail, but also as it relates to water, sewer, our airports, our electrical grid, so many more broadly defined ways that we need to address as part of infrastructure. But let me cite specifically the gas tax. in real terms, not nominal dollars, but in real dollars, the gas tax is approximately 40% lower today than it was a quarter century ago. Why in the early 1990s this wasn't indexed to inflation, I have no idea, because much, well not all, much of the problem would have been solved had that simple measure taken place. So we need to finally do this. I am optimistic that this is, more than I think any other policy issue, an area where a Republican president and Donald Trump and a Democratic-controlled House can work together to identify those solutions. But let's be clear, in order to tackle the $1 trillion plus need that is out there, and I know you've cited a bigger figure, in order to tackle this, it will take real revenue. Not a small amount of revenue with crazy projections on how much the private sector can step up. So with the limited time that I have left, I would invite specifically Mr. DiLoretto to comment, especially while I focused on the gas tax, if you could address specifically that as a major source, at least within the next 5 to 10 years, of the funding that we need.
Right. Well, I think as you've heard my colleagues on the panel say, the gas tax is one that exists today. We can put it in place and we can move forward while we try to look at all these other methods that we might want to use. Fact is, your infrastructure doesn't care how you fund it, and they don't care who pays for it. It's going to fall apart, and that's what it's doing right now. It's just going to plain fall apart. The other thing we found is that the comment both you made and Congressman Gomez made, 33 states are looking at increasing their gas tax. These are Republican-led states and Democratic-led states. Honestly and respectfully, it's been our United States partner, Congress, that has failed to participate with us as we've tried to do this. So, and that's kind of why we're here today.
Thank the gentleman. Someone who now you have the honor of being the closer, Mr. Harford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member. This is a very important hearing, and the way that the chairman structured the hearing to have from the very beginning representation from the chair and the ranking member from the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, representatives from the business and labor community, really speaks to this opportunity to work together to solve a really important need for our entire country. I'm from Nevada. And since 2010, Nevada's population has grown by nearly 300,000 new residents, an 11% increase, and that's on top of the growth that we experienced in the 90s, making Nevada the 6th fastest growing state in the country. And as our state grows, so too does our need to expand our transportation and infrastructure needs. While our roads and bridges need desperate attention, we also need to consider our community's broader infrastructure challenges, everything from energy projects to modernizing our schools to airport infrastructure. And as has been stated, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave Nevada a D rating on a dam system. 154 of Nevada's dams are considered to have a, quote, high hazard, meaning that the failure of the dam could cause loss of life or significant property damage. We have stormwater infrastructure needs. Nevada will see projected funding shortfalls during the next 10 years for flood mitigation projects, and 17 of our school districts throughout Nevada require modernization of our facilities. That said, Nevada has over 32,000 miles of roadways that require attention. More than 500 bridges are over 50 years old and would require approximately $133 million for repair. Roads and bridges that are deficient, congested, or unsafe cost Nevada's motorists a total of $3.2 billion annually. Now, to address congestion in the region, our state, when I was in the state Senate, like my colleagues who served previously in their legislatures, we enacted the beginning of what is now Interstate 11, and we are working hard to bring that project to its full development, and this really would help to connect Mexico to Canada through Nevada and Nevada's 4th District. So we all agree that we must act, and we must act now. So, Mr. Spear, it's good to see you again. Thank you for the time that you've spent with us. Quickly, what are some short-term and long-term solutions that we can implement to ensure strong investments in our nation's infrastructure?
Chairman DeFazio and Ranking Member Graves testified this morning, and as they craft programmatic elements of this bill to really give serious thought to prioritization. From a roads and highways and bridges perspective, we know every year what the top 100 bottlenecks are in the country. We know where they are. We track them every year with Federal Highway through GPS data. American Transportation Research Institute's responsible for that data. And it's invaluable because it allows you to look at that immediately and see where the congestion, where the chokeholds are. If we're sitting in traffic and losing $74.5 billion a year as just the trucking industry, and we're only 4% of the vehicles on the road, but we're moving 71% of the domestic freight, think of what we're paying for food, for beverages, for clothes. Anything that we buy is reflected in that congestion. It transcends down to consumers. So you're having a dramatic impact on the economy, what everyday consumers pay for everyday things, by alleviating congestion in those top 100 bottlenecks. That would be an immediate priority that I would recommend the committee focus on.
Thank you. Mr. DiLoretto, as has been mentioned, several states, including my home state, have enacted plans using municipal bonding to fund capital-intensive projects such as highways and schools. And there is a model to get these things done. When I served in the state Senate, we brought the business community labor together to fund these needed projects. So what are your general thoughts on using bonds as a potential funding method?
Well, as I said, as a former city engineer and public works director, for capitalization, they were one of our biggest sources. We would go out there, we would sell those bonds, and they were the cheapest source of funding that we could get, which translated into the cheapest sort of funding that our ratepayers would then pay for those projects. It's critical that they remain a tool that we're able to use.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Sometimes when we gather as a committee, we don't always see eye to eye, and that's certainly to be expected. Political disagreements are a natural part of the process here, particularly in this room. But today, I think we've all agreed that tackling the crumbling infrastructure of our nation is a worthwhile goal. So I look forward to working with our colleagues to find real workable solutions that will help our communities prosper and ensure America's long-term economic security. I want to in particular thank our witnesses for your patience today. You did a superb job. We're looking now at almost more than 4.5 hours of witness testimony and taking the questions as we went back and forth. But I sensed in the room today no hostility to the points that were being made. So again, members are advised that they have 2 weeks to submit written questions. We would ask you to answer those promptly if you could. And those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. And with that, the committee stands adjourned. And I thank the witnesses again and the members. Thank you very much. Thanks, George. What's happened is I was telling